Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the P&W Car Mods YouTube channel. Today we're going to be going over and discussing my do-it-yourself external fuel pump that I've added to my car to try and get more fuel to the engine. We're working with a C5 Corvette. It's got a forged 408 and a LSA supercharger. We had it on the dyno a couple months ago, and we found we were running out of fuel, or running out of fuel system, I should say. So like I said, I've made the attempt to build a system myself. There are kits that you can buy from a couple of the like A&A Corvette and East Coast Supercharging, but I wanted to do it myself. I think there's a fair amount of money to be saved by doing that. So let's kind of go over this. So one thing that I started off with, the foundation to this system, let me back up a little bit. When I say external fuel pump, the car still has its in-tank system. That's kind of the beauty of this setup. Under normal driving conditions, we are running off of the stock fuel bucket and pump assembly inside of the left-hand tank. This particular car has a 255 liter per hour pump in the bucket, so it's a good all-around pump, not too big, not going to overheat the fuel. But what makes this external setup work is this billet fuel block right here, and it's capable of providing another return. My car is an early C5, so it has its own return all the way to the engine bay. But in my case, I am now using the lower port as a feed to our new AEM 400 liter per hour pump, external pump. This is an Evil Energy 100 micron, so basically it's just there to catch dirt and rocks from tearing up your pump. This is the fuel pump relay right here. It's being fed by a 10 gauge wire. This is our feed hose up to the engine bay, and we've got everything secured. I did some steel riv nuts into this chassis plate right here to hold the pump, and then just a couple of small self tappers on these P-clamps to hold this stuff from going anywhere. So that's starting at the back. This is kind of where it all gets going. If anybody's wondering what this additional wiring here is, that is a Racetronics hot wire kit for the factory pump installation. Gets you full battery power coming direct off the alternator to feed that pump. This relay is also being fed direct off the stud off the alternator. 10 gauge wire all the way to the back. So let's go to the front. Oh, and if anybody's inquiring on costs, without this billet fuel block, you could probably build this kit that I've made here for right around 500 bucks, maybe even a little bit less. This is all PTFE lined hose for E85. I'm not running E85, but it's capable of running E85 if I wanted to. Unfortunately, we don't have E85 around here. Using this block is 200 bucks by itself. So that was a little bit of a splurge. If I wasn't going to use the block, I would use a bulkhead fitting that is specifically made for plastic tanks, and it sandwiches the tank wall. So you'd have to somehow weasel yourself inside the tank to spin the nut on the back side of it, but I think that's the second best way to go. The third alternative, and I think it's complete trash, is drilling a hole in the tank and just jamming NPT threads into it. I've heard of guys using a couple different kinds of glue to make that work, and some people have luck with it and other people have chronic leaks with it. I didn't want to mess with any of that. Moving along to the front here, we're in the left front fender now. The steel frame rail. C5 Corvettes are body on frame. This is a 10 micron filter that is Summit house brand. Couple of self-tappers on some P-clamps holding this solidly to the frame. This is a 30 amp circuit breaker that is feeding the pump in the back. This is an adjustable 2 psi Hobbs switch. This trigger wire comes from a key-on source, the same trigger wire that I'm using for the relays on my intercooler pump and my wideband gauge. This silicone boost hose is going up to a boost source off of the supercharger. I have my wiring and the Dash 8 feed hose running through the rocker panel on the car. They're both double protected with snake skin and then black plastic spiral wrap from one end to the other and not together. There's 2 separate runs of that, one for the wiring and then one for the feed hose. There are some people that are petrified of doing that because they're scared they're going to get T-boned by somebody. So that's kind of your call. I personally am not too worried about it because that feed hose is probably only 6 to 7 inches off of the ground. I don't know too many cars that are going to T-bone you with a front bumper low enough to ever hit that hose. That's going to be a pretty freaky thing. And also, that pump's not running all the time. So if you were to get in an accident, the likelihood of you having that pump turned on under boost while you get T-boned is slim to none, in my opinion. So it's not like if something happened to that line, there's going to be fuel spraying all over the place. So that's my topic of, or my thought process on not worrying about an accident scenario with that hose. The other reason I want the fuel system that's going to be running under boost to be on the outside of the chassis is I do believe in heat soak for fuel, and I don't want heat soak in my fuel. Think about this. If this was running in the tunnel and it's not running all the time, it's not going to run that much at all, really. It's going to sit there and heat soak really, really hot because there's no fuel moving through it. And then the moment you hit boost, you're going to inject hot fuel straight into the engine. And for those of you that don't think that makes a difference, I would watch. There's a specific Motor Trend episode of Engine Masters with David Freiberger and Steve Dulcich and the West Tech guys, and they do a fuel temperature test on an engine, on a dyno, starting with really cold fuel all the way to almost vapor locking fuel. And the difference in power was astronomical. So I think it's important to try and keep that fuel coming from the external pump as cool as possible. If I didn't mention it, the Summit filter was like $60. Fairly expensive for a nice 10 micron. Beyond that, you're going to be looking at like Aeromotive 10 microns. They're pretty expensive. I don't recall if Evil Energy made a 10 micron. I don't remember. I went ahead and went with this one because it's a little bit smaller and lighter. So this is a continuation of our feed hose. This is our 10 gauge cable coming from the alternator to the circuit breaker. There's no protection from that alternator stud down to this circuit breaker, so you better make absolutely sure whatever wire you're going to feed your fuel pump relay with to this circuit breaker is very well protected and it can't chafe on anything. Because if you short that out, bad things are going to happen. Here's the stud on the alternator. So this is what's feeding both the hot wire kit for the in-tank pump and also the fuel pump relay for the external pump. This is the stock feed line coming off the firewall, and it comes up here and hits this Y block. This is the secondary fuel hose coming from the external pump, also into the Y block. Y block goes to the passenger fuel rail, goes through the fuel rail, loops around behind the blower, and I have another Dash 8 hose behind the blower, believe it or not, very tight fit. And we have a loop back this side, and then here is our return hose coming out of the fuel rail into our regulator. Now, where I'm not sure if this is going to work or not is I'm using a shared regulator for both fuel systems. It works fine when I test each system independently. But if I have the in-tank pump running and then I jumper the Hobbs switch while the car is running to activate the external pump, the fuel pressure goes up to like 70 psi. This is my semi-temporary fuel gauge that I have for monitoring this thing while I'm getting it all tuned. Like I said, when both are running, it was going up to like 70 psi. I don't know if that's reality though of what it's actually going to be doing under load, so I still have to test that. I'm hoping that anybody else out there that's bored enough to watch this video could possibly chime in on how they did their external fuel system on their C5 or even C6 Corvette. I'm looking for any advice on how to set this up. If I need to make changes, I need to make changes. I'm okay with that. So yeah, that's where we're at. Like I said, I've got about maybe not quite $700 into this installation. You know, and I'm very happy with the way it came out so far. I didn't mention it before, but the ground for the pump is into this mount bracket right here, verified with a meter that it grounds real good and doesn't have high resistance. This is all steel, so that works really good. This is a ground point here, and then there's another ground up here. It's all tied together. I actually metered to both of those ground points with this ground to make sure that it was all good and happy. For those of you that might be concerned about the protection of the pump and the hoses and filter back here, there is a factory composite wheel well liner that goes in here. I just need to put it back in. I'll do that after I get done filming this. And then obviously in the front wheel well, there is a closeout panel that screws in here and protects all this stuff, so no worries for protection there. Like I said, this isn't so much a mandatory tell everybody else how to do it as much as it is as somebody else seeing the video and maybe offering some advice on if this is going to work. Having the two systems on a shared regulator, and if it won't work, let me know the best way to make it work. There is check valves in each of these systems to keep the system separated. That's another key to kind of making this work, so we don't have fuel backflowing when either system is turned on. I'm unclear where the internal check valve is on the main system. I think it may be in the line going up to the firewall. On the external system, this blue fitting that AEM gives you, they provide it with the pump. That is its own check valve right there. So that's all I got for now. I need to get those liners put back in, and we're going to go out and road test it and see how it behaves. Open to suggestions. Thanks for checking it out, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. And we should have this car back on the dyno here in the next month or so. Thanks for tuning in.